Man tied her puppies to a tree. What this brave mother dog did will shock you. Scene 1, a silent scream in the Alberta chill. Two tiny forms, mere shadows against the stark white canvas of the Alberta winter, hung suspended from the skeletal branches of a gnarled pine. They were German shepherd puppies, barely 3 months old, their coats still soft, their eyes still holding the innocent wonder of a world yet unexplored. Now that wonder was replaced with terror, mirrored in the wide, frantic pupils that scanned the frozen landscape. Rusted chains, cruel and unforgiving, twisted around their fragile bodies, constricting their breath with each desperate struggle. The metal bit into their tender skin, leaving angry red welts against the backdrop of their fur, one a rich golden brown, the other a stark, unsettling black. They dangled, suspended between the earth and the uncaring sky, their whimpers swallowed by the biting wind that whistled through the barren trees. No one heard their cries, not the townsfolk nestled in their warm homes miles away, shielded from the wilderness by the comforting glow of electric lights. Not the deer that cautiously navigated the snow-covered underbrush, their senses attuned to the slightest hint of danger. Not even the ravens circling overhead, their sharp eyes missing the subtle tragedy unfolding below. No one, it seemed, cared enough to break the silence of that desolate morning. No one except her. Luna, their mother, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat as thick as the winter itself. Her amber eyes, usually pools of warmth and intelligence, now burned with a primal fury that threatened to consume her. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her powerful body coiled tight, her muscles trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. The scent of her pups, mingled with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid bite of fear, hung heavy in the air, an invisible chain pulling her forward. But she hesitated, held back by an unseen force, a cruel hand that had orchestrated this nightmare. He was there, lurking in the shadows of the trees, his presence a suffocating weight on the crisp morning air. He watched her, a dark figure shrouded in a heavy parka, his face hidden by the deep cowl. He was a predator, relishing the torment he inflicted, the silent screams that echoed in Luna's heart. He had waited, patiently, knowing that her love for her pups would be her undoing. He wanted her to suffer, to feel the same agonizing pain he had endured years ago, a pain he blamed solely on her. What kind of monster would do this to puppies? What twisted darkness resided within his soul that drove him to such depravity, and why was he waiting for her? The answer, Luna knew instinctively, was not simple. It was a tangled web of betrayal, revenge, and a burning desire to extinguish the light that shone within her. This story wasn't just about cruelty, it was about the unbreakable bond between a mother and her young. It was about loyalty that transcended species, a loyalty forged in the crucible of shared experience. It was about revenge, a festering wound that poisoned the soul and drove men to commit unspeakable acts. And above all, it was about a mother who would give everything, even her own life, to save her young. A mother who had faced down danger countless times, who had stared into the abyss and emerged victorious. But this time, the stakes were higher, the enemy more cunning, and the odds stacked against her. What happened next would haunt you, would linger in your mind long after the last word was read, the last scene watched. It would expose the darkest corners of the human heart, the capacity for both unimaginable cruelty and boundless love. But it would also restore your faith in the enduring power of courage, the unwavering strength of the maternal instinct, and the unwavering hope that even in the darkest of nights, the light of love can still prevail. Clearwater Ridge, a sleepy mountain town tucked beneath the snow-covered ridges of northern Alberta, held its breath in the stillness of winter. It was the kind of place where the days came gently, draped in soft sunlight and the promise of a quiet evening. The nights passed in quiet surrender to the vast, star-studded sky, a silent testament to the enduring beauty of the natural world. But not that morning. That morning the silence was a lie, a thin veneer masking the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. That morning the fate of two innocent puppies and the unwavering spirit of their mother hung precariously in the balance. Scene 2. Emma and the Ghosts of Winter. Emma Reed stepped out of the front door, the wooden frame creaking a familiar song of age and enduring strength. She zipped up her forest green coat, the thick fabric offering a meager defense against the biting wind that whipped down from the snow-capped peaks surrounding Clearwater Ridge. The air was a frigid kiss on her cheeks, a stark reminder of the long winter that still held the town in its icy embrace. She was in her early 30s, her figure lean and tall, sculpted by years of hiking in the mountains, and the quiet strength of a woman who had weathered storms both external and internal. Freckled cheeks, dusted with a faint rose hue from the cold, framed a pair of hazel eyes that held a depth of wisdom beyond her years. Auburn hair, usually a cascade of fiery color, was pulled back into a low ponytail, a practical decision for the harsh weather, but also a subtle shield against the world. She walked with purpose, each step measured and deliberate, but not without a weariness that clung to her like the persistent winter chill. There was a subtle slump in her shoulders, a quiet echo from a loss that had burrowed deep within her soul. A miscarriage, suffered 2 winters ago, had left an invisible scar, a constant reminder of what could have been. The experience had changed her, softened her sharp edges into something steadier, something more watchful. She had always been a private person, never much for crowds or idle chatter. The vastness of the mountains suited her, the quiet solitude a balm for her restless spirit. But after the miscarriage, she retreated even further, finding solace only in the company of her husband, James, and her loyal companion, Luna. Beside her walked Luna, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a thick, sable coat that rippled with muscle beneath its dense fur. Her deep amber eyes, usually bright and alert, held a flicker of apprehension this morning, a subtle mirroring of Emma's own unease. Luna possessed the alert posture of a dog who had once run toward gunfire, who had faced down danger without hesitation, a dog who had witnessed the darkest corners of human nature and emerged with her spirit intact. She moved stiffly this morning, favoring her rear left leg. A scar, jagged and pale, marred the sleek line of her hock, a permanent reminder of her final mission as a police canine. It was a badge of honor, a testament to her bravery, but it also caused her pain, especially in the cold. Luna had a history, one etched into muscle and memory. She had served with distinction on the Clearwater Ridge police force, earning numerous commendations for her unwavering dedication and remarkable skills. She had helped bring down a notorious drug runner in a high-speed mountain pursuit, earning both medals and a bullet wound before retiring into civilian life. The bullet, a stray round fired in the chaos of the chase, had shattered a bone in her leg, ending her career, but forging an even deeper bond with Emma and James. They had nursed her back to health, providing her with a loving home where she could finally rest and enjoy the simple pleasures of life. Emma opened the back of the SUV, the metal cold against her gloved hand. She patted the folded blanket inside, its soft texture a comforting contrast to the harshness of the day. "Come on, girl," she said softly, her voice a gentle caress that only Luna could hear. Luna obeyed with a groan, a low rumble deep in her chest. Her hind legs pushed off the frosty ground, her movements deliberate and careful. She hopped into the back of the SUV, settling down on the blanket with a contented sigh. The vet appointment was routine, just a follow-up to monitor the old injury and ensure that it wasn't causing her too much pain. But Emma always made sure to stay beside Luna, even in the waiting room, offering her comfort and reassurance. That kind of loyalty was earned both ways, a silent understanding that transcended words. As Emma adjusted Luna's blanket, a sudden gust of wind swirled around her, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and snow. She shivered, a primal instinct warning her of something unseen, something amiss. She glanced back at the house, a sense of unease settling in her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, that the fragile peace they had found was about to be shattered. Little did she know that her instinct was right, and the calm she felt this morning was only the eye of the storm that would engulf her life. Scene 3. Luna. Echoes of gunfire and a scarred legacy. The rumble of the SUV's engine faded into the crisp mountain air, leaving behind a silence that felt both peaceful and unsettling. Inside the house, James watched from the living room window as Emma and Luna drove away, the taillights of their vehicle disappearing around the bend in the road. He was in his mid-30s, his frame stockier than Emma's, built for comfort and endurance rather than speed and agility. A messy beard, a patchwork of ginger and brown, framed a face that held a mixture of intelligence and weariness. Clear blue eyes, usually bright and inquisitive, held more questions than answers, a reflection of the complex world he navigated as a journalist. Years of chasing headlines, of witnessing both the best and worst of humanity, had tempered his optimism, replacing it with a quiet realism that often bordered on cynicism. He had met Emma years ago, drawn to her strength and her unwavering sense of justice. He admired her dedication to Luna, the way she treated the retired police dog, not just as a pet, but as a partner, a friend, a member of the family. He knew that Luna had brought something back to Emma, something she had lost after the miscarriage. Luna, in her own silent way, had filled the void in Emma's heart, offering unconditional love and a sense of purpose. And for James, Luna had been a lifeline, a reason to stay grounded, a reminder that even in the darkest of times there was still beauty and goodness in the world. He slid the glass door open, the cold air rushing in to fill the void. "Max! Toby!" he called out, his voice a warm rumble that echoed across the snow-covered yard. Two furry blurs erupted from the far corner of the garden, bounding towards him with unrestrained enthusiasm. Max was the bigger one, a miniature version of Luna with a rich golden-brown coat and a white blaze down his chest. He was bold, energetic, and endlessly curious, his nose constantly twitching as he explored the world with unbridled joy. He charged forward, his tail wagging furiously, leaving a trail of paw prints in the fresh snow. Toby, slightly smaller, was pure black with deep brown eyes that held a hint of caution. He followed Max everywhere like a shadow, his movements more measured, his steps more deliberate. He possessed a quiet intelligence, an ability to observe and analyze that belied his young age. Both pups were barely 3 months old, playful, innocent, and born under Luna's watchful eye. They were a constant source of amusement and affection, filling the house with their puppy yips and playful antics. They were a symbol of hope, a reminder of the enduring cycle of life, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. James tossed a red rubber ball across the yard, the bright color a stark contrast against the white snow. Max barreled after it, snow flying up in bursts, his playful barks echoing across the landscape. Toby trailed behind, his tail wagging with equal enthusiasm, his smaller legs working hard to keep up. As he watched the puppies play, James couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He knew that Luna missed her days on the force, the adrenaline rush of the chase, the satisfaction of bringing criminals to justice. He knew that she still dreamed of those days, her paws twitching in her sleep as she relived the excitement of the hunt. He checked his watch, 9:07 a.m. Emma and Luna should be at the vet's office by now. He hoped that the appointment would go smoothly, that Luna's leg wouldn't cause her too much pain. He worried about her, about the toll that her past had taken on her body and her mind. "Be good," he said, mostly to himself, his voice barely a whisper, carried away by the wind. He watched the puppies for a moment longer, their playful energy a comforting distraction from his worries. Then he turned and headed back inside, the warmth of the house a welcome embrace. He went to start a pot of coffee, the familiar aroma filling the kitchen with a sense of comfort and routine. He needed to review his notes for an article on rural water contamination, a story that didn't pay much but mattered deeply to him. He was determined to expose the truth, to fight for the rights of the people who were being harmed by corporate greed and government negligence. He left the sliding door cracked, as always, so the pups could come in and out as they pleased. The backyard was fenced in, safe, a haven from the dangers of the outside world. But the thing about evil, James knew, was that it didn't always break in. Sometimes it walked in the same way it once walked out, and sometimes it comes with knowledge that is deeply sinister. Scene 4. The cracked door and a stolen dawn. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, a comforting scent that usually calmed James's restless spirit. He sat at the kitchen table, the blue glow of his laptop illuminating his face, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he reviewed his notes on the water contamination case. He was a man driven by a need to uncover the truth, to give voice to the voiceless, to fight for justice in a world that often seemed indifferent to suffering. But this morning, his concentration was fractured, his thoughts constantly drifting back to Emma and Luna. He pictured them in the sterile environment of the vet's office, Luna's stoic demeanor masking the pain in her leg, Emma's unwavering support a constant source of comfort. He hoped that the appointment wouldn't take too long, that they would be back home soon, safe and sound. He glanced at the sliding door, the narrow opening allowing a sliver of cold air to seep into the room. He could hear the muffled sounds of Max and Toby playing in the yard, their playful barks a reassuring presence in the otherwise quiet house. He trusted that the fenced-in backyard would keep them safe, that they were far from any harm. At 9:38 a.m., James returned to the kitchen, his coffee mug half empty, his mind still preoccupied with the complexities of the water contamination case. He paused at the threshold, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Something was wrong. No barking, no playful yips, no paws tapping across the hardwood floor. That's what struck him first, the unnatural silence that had descended upon the house. Max and Toby were always eager to greet him, their tails wagging furiously, their bodies wriggling with excitement. But now, there was nothing. Only a chilling stillness that sent a shiver down his spine. "Max! Toby!" he called again, his voice laced with a growing sense of urgency. He stepped onto the deck, the cold seeping through his socks, the wind biting at his exposed skin. Silence. He scanned the snow-covered yard, his eyes darting from one corner to another, just footprints from earlier, the playful tracks of two happy puppies romping in the snow. No signs of struggle, no damage to the fence. Everything appeared normal, yet James knew in his gut that something was terribly wrong. He opened the gate, the hinges squealing in protest, the sound amplified by the eerie silence. He walked down the steps, his heart pounding in his chest, his senses on high alert. Eyes darting, ears straining, he searched for any sign of the missing pups. And then he saw it, a scrap of fabric, a small piece of red cloth, half buried in the snow near the far corner of the fence. Toby's red neckerchief, a playful accessory that Emma had insisted on putting on him. It was partially obscured by a snowdrift, its bright color dulled by the surrounding white. James reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as he brushed away the snow. And that's when he saw it. A smear of dark red on the fabric, a chilling stain that sent a wave of nausea washing over him. Blood. His stomach dropped, the bottom falling out of his world. He bolted back inside, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to know what had happened. He had to find Max and Toby. He had to protect them from whatever evil had befallen them. He went straight for the hallway cabinet where they kept the security camera monitor. His fingers fumbled with the latch, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he opened the door. He switched on the monitor, the screen flickering to life, the grainy images of the security footage filling his vision. His fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled through the morning footage, his eyes scanning the timestamps, searching for any clue, any sign of what had happened to his beloved puppies. He hoped against hope that it was all a mistake, that they had simply wandered off, that they were safe and sound. But deep down, he knew that something terrible had occurred, and he was about to find out exactly what that was. Scene 5. The key to betrayal, unmasking the thief. The cold light of the security monitor cast harsh shadows across James's face as he scrolled through the morning's footage. Each second felt like an eternity, each passing minute ratcheting up the tension in his chest. He needed answers, needed to know where Max and Toby were, needed to banish the growing fear that threatened to consume him. Finally, at 9:12 a.m., movement flickered on the screen. A figure, blurred and indistinct, partially obscured by a snowdrift in the trees beyond the fence. The quality was poor, the image grainy and indistinct, but James leaned forward, his eyes straining to make out any detail. Male, judging by his build. Average height, neither towering nor diminutive. He wore a dark parka, the hood drawn up, concealing his face in shadow. The anonymity was deliberate, a calculated attempt to erase his identity, to leave no trace. He walked with a purpose, not rushed, not frantic, but with a determined stride that spoke of familiarity, like someone revisiting familiar ground, someone who knew the landscape, someone who had been here before. The casual pace was even more chilling than frantic flight would have been. It spoke of confidence and cold calculation. James leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat as the man paused at the gate. Then, the sound. A short, high-pitched whistle, sharp and rhythmic, cutting through the static of the recording. A sound that resonated deep within James's gut. A sound that triggered a primal fear. It was a command whistle, the kind used to train police dogs, the kind that Luna had been trained to respond to during her years on the force. A whistle that bypassed conscious thought, triggering an instinctive reaction, a deeply ingrained obedience. The puppies did too. Instantly their little heads turned toward the sound, their ears perked, their bodies momentarily frozen in place. Max ran first, his playful energy overriding his caution, his trusting nature leading him towards the unknown. Toby hesitated, a flicker of apprehension in his dark eyes, but followed, his loyalty to Max outweighing his instinctive fear. The man opened the gate, not with force, not by breaking the lock, but with a key, a simple, unassuming key that fit perfectly into the lock, turning it with a soft click. That realization hit James like a physical blow, a crushing weight that stole the air from his lungs. A key. That meant someone had access to their property, someone they trusted, someone who had betrayed their confidence. His hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white against the screen. The figure scooped the pups into a thick wool blanket, tucking them under one arm with practiced ease. He turned and walked calmly back toward the trees, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. Total time, less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes to steal their innocence, to shatter their peace, to plunge their lives into darkness. 3 minutes to unleash a nightmare that would forever change their world. James rewound the footage, rewatched it again and again, searching for any detail he might have missed. No broken locks, no smashed panels, no signs of forced entry. Whoever it was had known the code or had made a copy of the gate key. Either way, they knew dogs and they knew Luna. They knew their routines, their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses. He picked up his phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad, almost dialing the local police. But something stopped him. Not fear, not hesitation, instinct. This wasn't random. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was personal. This was targeted. This was about Luna. He closed the laptop, the screen fading to black, plunging the room into darkness. He walked outside again, the cold air biting at his face, the snow falling softly, blanketing the landscape in a shroud of white. He kneeled by the spot where the scarf had dropped, his fingers tracing the edges of the blood stain. Still damp. The blood was fresh, not enough to mean serious injury, just enough to send a message. A message that was chillingly clear. They wanted Luna, and they were willing to hurt her puppies to get to her. Scene 6. A mother's fury. The scent of betrayal. The hands on the clock seemed to mock James, each tick a hammer blow against his already frayed nerves. Noon approached with agonizing slowness, each passing minute stretching into an eternity. He paced the living room, his restless energy a palpable force, his mind churning with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. He tried to focus on the water contamination case, tried to channel his anger and fear into something productive, but it was no use. The image of the hooded figure stealing Max and Toby replayed endlessly in his mind, a cruel loop that he couldn't escape. He had to do something, had to act, had to find his pups before it was too late. But what? He felt helpless, paralyzed by the enormity of the situation, trapped in a nightmare that seemed to have no escape. Finally, the distant rumble of the SUV's engine broke through the silence. Hope surged through him, a fragile spark in the darkness. Emma and Luna were back. Before the engine even cut, before the wheels had fully stopped turning, Luna leapt out of the car, her movements a blur of sable fur and pent-up energy. She landed on the snowy ground with a grace that belied her age and her injury, her senses immediately on high alert. She sniffed once, her nose twitching, her nostrils flaring as she inhaled the frigid air. Then again, a longer, more deliberate sniff, her body tensing, her ears perking up. And then a low growl rumbled in her chest, a guttural sound that spoke of primal rage and protective instinct. Her eyes locked onto the far fence corner, the spot where James had found Toby's neckerchief, the spot where the hooded figure had disappeared into the trees. Her body stiffened, every muscle coiled tight, her tail raised, her fur bristling along her spine. She was a coiled spring, ready to unleash her fury on anyone who dared to threaten her young. She bolted, a flash of sable against the white snow, her powerful legs eating up the distance with astonishing speed. She ran towards the spot with desperate force, her paws pawing frantically at the ground, her nails tearing at the snow. Emma came running, her face etched with worry, her voice laced with concern. "What's wrong? Luna, what is it, girl?" James met her halfway, his face pale, his voice hoarse, his hands trembling as he held out the scarf. He couldn't bring himself to speak the words, couldn't bear to voice the terrible truth that had taken root in his soul. Her face crumpled as she took it, her eyes widening in horror as she recognized the familiar fabric, the cheerful pattern that she had so carefully chosen for Toby. She touched the bloodstain, her fingers recoiling as if burned, her breath catching in her throat. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No. This can't be happening." No one saw anything, James said, his voice hoarse, his words heavy with guilt and despair. But I saw the footage. Someone used a command whistle, just like the ones from her K9 training. Emma looked at Luna, who was still pawing at the snow with desperate force, her body trembling with barely suppressed rage. She understood immediately what James was trying to tell her. "They were after her, weren't they?" she whispered, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and understanding. "They knew who she was, what she meant to us." James stared into the woods, the trees standing like silent sentinels, their branches casting long, ominous shadows across the snow. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, his heart filled with a burning desire for revenge. "I think they were after revenge," he said, his voice low and menacing. And somewhere beyond those trees, 2 puppies were waiting in the dark. The hunt had begun. Scene 7. Sleepless nights and ghosts of the past. The darkness that descended upon Clearwater Ridge that night was deeper, colder, more oppressive than any James had ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a tangible weight, a suffocating presence that seemed to seep into his very bones. He barely slept, his body tense, his mind racing, his senses on high alert. The shadows on the walls shifted with each passing hour, distorted shapes that seemed to mock him with their silent accusations. The cold outside seemed to seep into his chest, no matter how tightly he pulled the blanket over himself, a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of his loved ones. Emma lay next to him, unmoving but clearly awake. He could feel the tension radiating from her body, the shallow, strained breathing that betrayed her inner turmoil. He knew that she was reliving the horror of the past few hours, replaying the image of the blood-stained scarf, the realization that her beloved pups were in danger. Downstairs, Luna paced the floor, her claws ticking softly against the hardwood, a relentless metronome of grief. The sound was a constant reminder of their loss, a haunting echo that filled the silence of the house. Every few minutes she would stop, sniff the air, and whine, a low, guttural sound that pierced deeper than any alarm ever could. The house, once filled with the joyful puppy yips and the comforting clatter of food bowls, now felt hollow, empty, devoid of life. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking clock, Luna's restless pacing, and the occasional creaks and groans of the old house settling in for the night. The absence of Max and Toby was a constant ache, a physical pain that settled in James's chest, a reminder of the innocence that had been stolen, the joy that had been extinguished. He couldn't imagine what they were going through, trapped in the hands of a cruel and heartless captor. By morning, James was hunched over his desk, the blue glow of his laptop casting harsh lines across his face, accentuating the dark circles under his eyes. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, the bitter taste a fitting metaphor for the despair that threatened to engulf him. He wasn't searching social media, scrolling through forums, or desperately clinging to the false hope offered by online conspiracy theories. He knew better than to expect easy answers, knew that the truth was often buried deep, hidden beneath layers of lies and deception. Instead, he dug into a private folder on his computer, a collection of files that he hadn't opened in years. Luna's cases. The folder contained every major article, every police report, every scrap of information he had collected while shadowing Luna's career during her final years on the force. It was once meant for a book, a tribute to working dogs who had saved lives, changed lives, who had dedicated their lives to serving and protecting others, but he never finished it. Life got in the way, deadlines loomed, and the project was abandoned, relegated to the dusty corners of his hard drive. Now the files had become a map, a trail of breadcrumbs leading him back through the past, a past that suddenly mattered more than ever. He clicked through the names, the faces, the crimes, the victims. Some were gone, their stories lost to time. Others were behind bars, paying the price for their misdeeds. But one name stood out, not just in memory, but in tone, in the subtle nuances of the police reports, in the hushed whispers of the detectives who had worked the case. Travis. The name sent a chill down James's back, a sudden and visceral reaction that told him he was on the right track. Travis had been a mid-level drug runner, operating out of a now-defunct lumber warehouse outside Edmonton. He was a violent and unpredictable man, known for his brutality and his ruthlessness. What made him different wasn't just his propensity for violence, but his obsession with control. He had once forced a rival to swallow a packet of heroin and locked him in a freezer, just to watch the timeline of his slow and agonizing death. A deeply sadistic man. In 2018, Travis had evaded police in a foot chase through a narrow stretch of forest. Luna, then a younger, sharper canine, had tracked him solo for nearly 2 kilometers, her instincts leading her unerringly towards her prey. She found him hiding under the floorboards of an abandoned trailer, his body trembling with fear and desperation. She bit deep into his leg before backup arrived, her powerful jaws clamping down with unrelenting force. Travis fought back, cracking her rib with a metal rod before being restrained. As he was dragged away, bloodied and screaming, he turned back to Luna, his eyes burning with hatred and rage. "That ruined my life," he spat, his voice laced with venom. "I'll return the favor someday." No one took it seriously, just the rantings of a desperate criminal, but James did now. He sat back, his eyes locked on the screen, the image of Travis's face seared into his memory. Then he stood, his movements deliberate, his resolve hardening with each step. He reached for his jacket, his decision made. "I'm heading out," he told Emma, who had been standing silently in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale and drawn. She nodded, saying nothing, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Luna stood behind her, tense and waiting, her body vibrating with pent-up energy. James stopped to pet her head, his hand running down her thick fur. "We'll find them," he whispered, his voice low and reassuring. "I promise you, we'll bring them home." He only hoped his promise wasn't empty. He had to stop Travis, and he had to do it now. Scene 8. Badge and a grudge. The price of justice. The biting wind whipped across James's face as he stepped out of the house, the cold air a stark contrast to the stifling tension that had filled the room. He needed to move, to act, to channel his fear and anger into something productive. He needed to find Max and Toby. The Clearwater Police Department was little more than 4 rooms inside a beige government building next to the post office. The kind of place that smelled of stale coffee, old paperwork, and the lingering scent of regret. It was a small town, and the police force reflected that, a tight-knit group of men and women dedicated to serving and protecting their community. Sergeant Donna Briggs manned the front desk, her presence a force to be reckoned with. In her mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a tight bun and a deep voice roughened by years of smoking and shouting over radio static, Donna was both respected and largely feared in town. She had seen too many tragedies, witnessed too much suffering to sugarcoat anything. She was a no-nonsense woman, a straight shooter, a veteran of countless battles both on the streets and within the confines of her own troubled heart. She raised an eyebrow as James entered, her gaze sharp and assessing. "You look like hell, Reed. Rough night?" James didn't waste time with pleasantries. He cut straight to the chase, his voice urgent, his words clipped. "I'm looking into a name. Travis Reed." Donna exhaled, a long, weary sigh that spoke volumes about her own weariness. She leaned back in her chair, the springs groaning in protest, and crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. That freak. What about him? He's involved in my pup's disappearance, I know it. James's voice was firm, resolute. Donna gave him a long, searching look, her eyes probing, assessing his mental state. She had known James for years, respected his integrity, trusted his instincts, but she also knew that he was a journalist, prone to exaggeration, prone to flights of fancy. That's a hell of an accusation, James. You got anything to back it up? He has a history with Luna. She took him down years ago. He swore revenge. Donna sighed again, a mixture of exasperation and resignation. She turned to her computer, the hum of the machine filling the silence. After a few clicks, she printed a page off the record, sliding it across the desk towards James. That freak just got out last month. Parole, good behavior. Pisses me off every time I sign those releases. She spat the words out like venom. Is he in Clearwater? No address on file. Supposedly moved in with a cousin near Redwater, but that lead went cold. James scanned the parole paperwork, his eyes searching for any clue, any detail that could help him find Travis. Any way I can see his parole paperwork, see who his emergency contact is? Donna gave him a long, appraising look, her expression unreadable. She knew that James was desperate, that he was operating on instinct, that he was willing to do anything to get his pups back. She also knew that she was walking a fine line, potentially jeopardizing her career, potentially breaking the law, but she also knew that she couldn't stand idly by while innocent animals were being hurt. She had seen too much cruelty in her life, too much suffering. She owed it to those pups, to Luna, to James, to do whatever she could to help. Off the record, she said, her voice low, her eyes locking onto James's. She's sliding a second piece of paper over. Travis's listed emergency contact was a woman named Samantha Dyer, living in a trailer compound near a truck stop 2 hours east. No phone number. James's jaw tightened. Samantha Dyer. He didn't know her, but he knew the type. He knew the kind of life she led, the kind of people she associated with. He knew that she was likely just as dangerous as Travis himself. James thanked her, his voice tight with emotion, his gratitude genuine. He knew that Donna was taking a risk by helping him, that she was putting her career on the line. He wouldn't forget it. He left without another word, his mind already racing, his plan forming. He knew where he had to go, knew what he had to do. He had to find Samantha Dyer, and he had to find Travis Reed, and he had to bring Max and Toby home. Justice, he knew, came at a price, and he was willing to pay it. Scene 9. The unraveling, bait in the woods. Meanwhile, while James was navigating the cold reality of police procedure and the murky depths of Travis Reed's past, Luna was not resting. Rest was a luxury she couldn't afford, a weakness she couldn't indulge. Her pups were missing, and every second that ticked by increased the danger they were in. That night, after James had left for the police station, Emma let her out for what was meant to be a short walk, a brief respite from the stifling confines of the house. But Luna tugged at the leash like a wild animal, her powerful body straining against the restraint, her nose glued to the ground. She wasn't interested in a leisurely stroll, in sniffing the familiar scents of their yard. She had a mission, a purpose, a driving need to find her children. Emma, sensing the urgency in Luna's movements, relented, unclipping the leash and allowing her to follow her instincts. Like a heat-seeking missile, Luna tore through the yard, her nose working furiously, her senses on high alert. She dragged Emma to the edge of the woods behind their house, to a cluster of low shrubs near the back fence, the same spot where the hooded figure had disappeared. There, half buried under leaves and snow, was a torn scrap of cloth. Rough canvas, dirty and stained, its edges frayed and worn. Luna pawed at it, her movements frantic, her whimpers a symphony of anguish. Then she lay down beside it, her body trembling, her head resting on the ground, as if drawing strength from the tattered fabric. Emma picked it up, her fingers recoiling at the rough texture, the lingering smell of dirt and decay. There were faint brown smears on the cloth, and, unmistakably, strands of golden fur clinging to the edges, Max's fur. A wave of nausea washed over Emma, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't random, this wasn't a coincidence, this was deliberate, this was a calculated act of cruelty, designed to torment and manipulate them. The cloth had been placed deliberately, not discarded carelessly. It reeked of manipulation, of a twisted game being played by a depraved mind. Whoever had taken the pups was toying with them, taunting them, leading them down a path of darkness. Emma called James, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "You need to come home, now." He arrived within 15 minutes, headlights sweeping through the woods, illuminating the snow-covered trees with an eerie, unnatural light. He examined the cloth, his hands tightening into fists, his face hardening with a grim determination. "Baiting her," he muttered, his voice low and menacing. "They want her to track them. They want to lead us into a trap." "She will," Emma whispered, her voice firm, her eyes locked onto Luna, who was still lying beside the cloth, her body trembling, her eyes fixed on the black depths of the woods. "She already is." James crouched beside Luna, scratching behind her ear, his touch gentle, reassuring. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his presence. Her eyes were fixed on the woods, her ears perked for a sound no human could hear, a scent no human could detect. She was already gone, already lost in the hunt, already consumed by the primal instinct to protect her young. The trap was set, the bait was laid, and Luna, driven by her unwavering love, was walking right into it. Scene 10. Samantha and the Logging Trail, a map of desperation. Inside the house that night, the air hung heavy with unspoken fears and a desperate determination. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, her face pale and drawn. She watched Luna through the window, the dog a dark sentinel against the moonlit snow, her body vibrating with restless energy. James reopened his laptop, the familiar hum of the machine, a small comfort in the oppressive silence. He typed one word into his search bar: Samantha Dyer. The internet offered little information, a scant and unflattering portrait of a life lived on the fringes. A petty theft charge, 2 evictions, a grainy photo from 5 years ago, long, stringy hair, sunken eyes, a face hardened by meth and misfortune. The kind of woman who had seen too much and felt too little, a casualty of a world that had chewed her up and spat her out. But James didn't need a full file, didn't need pages of documentation to understand people like Samantha. He had interviewed them, written about them, seen their faces etched with desperation and regret. They didn't protect people like Travis. They enabled them. They were trapped in a cycle of addiction and abuse, their lives controlled by forces beyond their comprehension. He sat back, thinking, his mind racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. If Travis had no listed home address, if he was a fugitive living on parole, and Samantha was unstable, where would he go? Somewhere remote, somewhere familiar, somewhere private. Somewhere he could disappear without a trace. He opened his map of the region, a digital tapestry of forests, mountains, and winding roads. He clicked on marked forestry routes, old logging trails, areas that were difficult to access, areas that were often overlooked by law enforcement. An old article he'd written flashed in his memory, a piece about an illegal logging trail 20 kilometers west of Clearwater, used briefly by drug runners before being shut down by the authorities. A forgotten corner of the wilderness, a place where secrets could be buried deep. He zoomed in on the area, his eyes scanning the terrain, searching for any landmark, any structure that might offer a clue. There it was. A hunting cabin, long abandoned, nestled near a frozen creek, its roof partially collapsed, its windows boarded up. No cell signal, no neighbors, the perfect place to hide. Or hurt. A shiver ran down his spine. He saved the coordinates, marking the location with a red pin. The next move would require backup. He couldn't go in alone, not against a man like Travis, not with Max and Toby's lives hanging in the balance, but time was already against them. Time was... Every minute that passed increased the danger, diminished the hope of a safe rescue. He had to act, and he had to act fast. James stood in the middle of his office, the room lit only by the weak grey glow leaking through the window, the storm still raging outside. The map was spread across the desk, pins and notes scattered around it like the aftermath of a storm. His eyes were locked on one specific mark, a faded red dot scribbled years ago during research on illegal hunting trails. It led to a forgotten cabin buried deep in the woods near Grand Pine, a place once used by smugglers and later abandoned after a fire scared them off. The structure was never demolished, left to rot and decay in the unforgiving wilderness. James had written a story about it once, calling it the loneliest place in Alberta. Now it might be the most dangerous. He rubbed his face, exhaustion soaking into every bone. He hadn't told Emma his full suspicion yet, hadn't shared the chilling details of Travis's past, hadn't voiced his deepest fears. If he was wrong, it would only raise false hope, prolong the agony. But if he was right... He opened his laptop again, revisited the parole files, and pulled up weather reports. Snow was coming, a blizzard was predicted to hit the region within hours. The window for action was closing, and he was running out of time. He had a bad feeling about the Grand Pine cabin, and he needed to check it out immediately. Scene 11. Loneliest place. Echoes in the dark. Meanwhile, far from the warmth and anxiety of the Reed household, in the heart of the Grand Pine forest, a small flame danced precariously from a dented kerosene lamp. It cast long, distorted shadows across the warped wood walls of the old cabin, illuminating the interior with a flickering, uneven light. The place smelled of mold, gasoline, and damp fur, a nauseating cocktail of decay and despair. Years of neglect and abandonment had left their mark on the cabin, the walls crumbling, the roof leaking, the floors rotting. It was a place of broken dreams and shattered hopes, a testament to the harsh realities of life in the wilderness. In the far corner of the room, 2 rusted cages sat against the wall, their metal bars cold and unforgiving. Inside one, Max curled up tightly, his golden fur matted with dirt and snow, his body trembling with cold and fear. He whimpered in his sleep, dreaming of home, of warmth, of the comforting presence of his mother. A faint cut ran down his shoulder, a souvenir from earlier when he had tried to force his way through the cage bars, his desperate attempts to escape, thwarted by the unyielding metal. The memory of the pain, the frustration, the sheer helplessness still lingered, a knot of anxiety in his young heart. Toby was in the other cage, smaller, darker, quieter. His black coat blended into the shadows, making him almost invisible in the dim light. He hadn't made a sound in hours, not even when the man had screamed at them earlier, his voice a terrifying torrent of anger and rage. He had learned quickly that noise brought attention, and attention brought pain. He had learned to suppress his fear, to stifle his whimpers, to disappear into the darkness. Survival, he knew instinctively, depended on silence. Travis Reed paced the room in slow, deliberate steps, his boots echoing hollowly on the rotting floorboards. He was in his early 40s, but looked older, his body gaunt from years of prison, his skin weathered like old leather, etched with the harsh lines of a life lived on the edge. A crooked scar cut through his jawline, a permanent reminder of his encounter with Luna, a mark of shame that he carried like a brand. He still touched it when he got angry, a nervous tic that had become instinct, a physical manifestation of the festering resentment that consumed him. He wore a grimy parka, its hood pulled down, revealing thinning brown hair and a patchy beard. His eyes were narrow, bloodshot, and always darting, as if the walls themselves might turn on him, as if the shadows held hidden dangers. His mind, long corroded by anger and isolation, had only one thought left that truly mattered: revenge. Not against James, the journalist who had exposed his crimes, not against the police who had locked him away, against her, the dog. He approached the cages slowly, crouching to their level, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing intensity. "You think she's coming, don't you?" he said softly, his voice cracking with a mixture of madness and anticipation. "She's a tracker, a protector. But I want her to feel what I felt. Betrayed. Forgotten." He pulled a rag from his pocket, a piece of an old dog toy from the Reed property, now soaked in the pup's scent. He had dragged it through the snow earlier that day, leaving a trail behind the cabin, weaving it in deliberate lines toward the west edge of the woods. It wasn't just bait, it was theater. A cruel and twisted performance designed to inflict maximum pain. He smiled, a twitch in his cheek, a fleeting glimpse of the darkness that lurked within his soul. "Let her come," he whispered. "Let her follow the scent of her children to their doom." He stood up and chuckled softly to himself. Scene 12. Shadow Walker, a hunter's instincts. Miles away, as Travis Reed prepared his twisted stage, Luna moved through the trees like smoke, a shadow gliding through the storm-racked forest. The sky above had darkened, heavy with the promise of snow, the wind howling like a banshee, tearing at the branches, whipping the snow into a frenzy. The forest was familiar in shape. She knew the territory around Clearwater Ridge like the back of her paw, but distorted in silence, made alien by the knowledge of what awaited her. She moved low to the ground, her body tense, her muscles coiled, her senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, every gust of wind sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. She was a hunter in her prime, a predator driven by instinct and purpose. She had once tracked missing children through rain-soaked forests, her unwavering dedication leading her unerringly towards her prey. She had once pursued armed gunmen through dark alleys, her courage and skill saving countless lives. But now she was older, slower, wounded. The years of service had taken their toll, leaving her body scarred and weary. Yet something deeper drove her forward, a primal force that transcended physical limitations, a maternal instinct that burned brighter than any pain. She could smell Max, Toby, the faint, lingering scent of their fur, mingled with the acrid bite of fear and the metallic tang of blood. The scents were old, hours past since they'd been taken, but real, anchoring her to her purpose. The scent of fear was fresh, fear unlike anything she had ever smelled. She passed a thin branch, broken recently, its exposed wood a stark white against the snow-covered bark. It reeked of Travis. The scent was unmistakable, a familiar odor that triggered a surge of hatred in Luna's heart, a burning desire for revenge. Back at the house, Emma stood by the window, her face pale, her eyes locked on the tree line, searching for any sign of Luna, any indication that she was safe. The wind howled low, rattling the windows, shaking the foundations of the house. She glanced at the dog bed by the fireplace, empty. She heard the door creak open behind her and turned, her heart leaping into her throat. James entered, dusted with frost, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of resolve and apprehension. He looked older, more weary than Emma had ever seen him. Something about the way his mouth was set, the way his jaw was clenched, told her he had made a decision that filled her with both fear and hope. "There's a cabin," he said, his voice low and even, "way out past the old log trails near Grand Pine. I think he's there." Emma didn't ask how he knew. She didn't question his intuition, didn't challenge his plan. She trusted him, trusted his judgment, trusted his unwavering commitment to protecting their family. She simply nodded, her eyes locked onto his. "Then we need to tell the police," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "We need to get back up. We can't do this alone." "I will," he said, his voice quiet, but his tone resolute. "But I need to go there first. I need to scout the area, assess the situation, make sure it's safe, just in case." She stepped forward, putting a hand on his chest, her fingers digging into his coat. "Take someone with you. Don't do this alone, please." "I'll call Donna," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers, his voice filled with a desperate plea. "I'll make sure we have support, I promise." He knew he was asking a lot of her, asking her to trust him, to wait, to endure the agonizing uncertainty. But he also knew that he had no choice. He had to go. He had to find Max and Toby. And he had to stop Travis Reed, once and for all. Scene 13. A Promise Kept. Blizzard's Embrace. Sergeant Donna Briggs picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp, alert, honed by years of responding to emergencies, years of dealing with the best and worst of humanity. She had just come off a 12-hour shift, her body aching, her mind weary, but her instincts remained razor-sharp. "Briggs," she barked into the phone, her tone conveying both authority and a weary acceptance of the inevitable. "Donna, it's James Reed," James replied, his voice tight with anxiety, his words clipped and urgent. "I know where Travis Reed is. I need your help." There was a pause, a moment of silence as Donna processed the information, weighed the risks, considered the consequences. She had bent the rules earlier, providing James with information that she shouldn't have. She was already in dangerous territory, jeopardizing her career. "You sure about this cabin, Reed?" she asked, her voice low, her tone cautious. "You got solid evidence, or is this just a hunch?" "It's the only place that makes sense, Donna," James pleaded, his voice desperate. "It's remote, it's abandoned, it's a place he can disappear, and Luna's tracking him that way." Donna sighed, a mixture of resignation and grim determination. She knew that James was right, knew that Travis Reed was a danger to society, knew that she couldn't stand idly by while innocent lives were at risk. "Meet me at the station in an hour," she said, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. "I'll bring Carter. We'll gear up and head out there. But you better be right about this, Reed. I'm sticking my neck out for you." Officer David Carter was one of Clearwater's youngest patrol officers, barely 25, with sandy hair, an easy smile, and a loyal streak a mile wide. He had been raised by his grandmother after his father vanished in a snowstorm when he was 6, a tragedy that had shaped his life, instilling in him a deep sense of compassion and a fierce determination to protect those who were vulnerable. That loss had shaped him. He never left things unfinished, was determined to bring closure for others. He met James and Donna in the station garage, dressed in winter tactical gear, his face flushed with adrenaline, his eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "We gonna find those pups?" he asked, his voice eager, his youthful enthusiasm a stark contrast to Donna's weary pragmatism. He loaded his shotgun with non-lethal rounds, his movements practiced and efficient. "We're going to try, Carter," Donna replied, her tone cautious, her eyes filled with a weary realism. "But this ain't going to be easy. Travis Reed is a dangerous man. He's not going to give up without a fight." They headed out in a single snow-equipped SUV, the tires crunching over fresh flurries, the windshield wipers working overtime to clear the falling snow. As they drove, James shared everything he knew about Travis, the revenge, the cages, the logging trail, the Grand Pine cabin. The drive took them deep into forestry land, the paved roads giving way to gravel tracks, the gravel tracks fading into barely visible trails. By then, the sun was a pale disk behind thick clouds, the light fading, the temperature plummeting. The GPS cut out 10 miles in, leaving them to rely on memory, instinct, and a growing sense of dread. The snow was falling harder now, the wind picking up, the landscape transforming into a blinding white void. "We lose the trail in this weather," Donna said, her voice grim. "We won't find her until spring." Inside the SUV, the air hung heavy with tension, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. Each mile that passed increased the danger, diminished the hope, and amplified the fear that gripped them all. James knew they were running out of time. He knew what Travis was capable of, and he knew that Max and Toby's lives hung precariously in the balance. Scene 14. The Lamb and the Lion, a choice of fates. Meanwhile, inside the dilapidated cabin, Travis sat by the door, a shotgun across his lap, his senses on high alert. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like a pack of wolves, the snow hammering against the walls. But he barely noticed. His focus was narrowed, his attention fixed on the surrounding woods, his mind consumed by a single burning desire. The dogs had stopped moving, their silence a source of both relief and unease. He hated the quiet. It made him think, made him remember, made him confront the demons that haunted his past. The absence of their whimpers was a chilling omen that he hadn't anticipated. He pulled a flask from his coat and took a swig, the cheap whiskey burning a welcome path down his throat, numbing the pain, silencing the voices. Then he stood, his movements stiff and deliberate, and walked to the cages, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. He opened Max's cage slowly, the rusted hinges squealing in protest, the sound amplified by the oppressive silence. The pup growled, a pathetic, weak sound, but defiant nonetheless. Travis grinned, a grotesque expression that contorted his face into a mask of madness. "You've got your mama's fire, eh? Let's see if she likes watching it die." He grabbed Max by the scruff of his neck, ignoring the pup's frantic struggles, and dragged him outside, leaving Toby behind in the darkness. The black pup watched helplessly as his brother was taken away, his body trembling with fear, his eyes wide with terror. He tied the dog's leash to a rusted hook on a tree just behind the cabin, the snow already beginning to accumulate on his golden fur, his ears flattening against his head in fear. He had tried to chew the rope, his teeth gnawing frantically at the coarse fibers, but failed. His jaws were too small, his strength too limited, his desperation not enough. Every so often he would bark short and sharp, as if calling into the void, as if pleading for help, as if hoping against hope that someone would hear him. Then he stopped, his energy spent, his hope dwindling, his body stiffened, his eyes locked onto the tree line, his senses on high alert. A shadow emerged from the storm, a dark figure gliding through the swirling snow. Luna. She stepped into the clearing, slow and deliberate, her movements precise and purposeful, her eyes fixed on the man who had taken her children. Blood marking each of her steps a crimson trail painted upon the pristine snow. The hunter had come for her prey. She didn't look at the cabin, didn't glance at the windows, didn't acknowledge the trees that surrounded her. Her eyes were locked onto Max first, a wave of relief washing over her and then morphing into fury as she took in his restraints. Only him. He was still alive, for now. Max gave a high-pitched yip, a sound filled with both fear and recognition, and wagged his tail weakly, a flicker of hope igniting in his young heart. Inside the cabin, Travis stood up fast, knocking over his chair, the sound echoing through the small space. He grabbed the shotgun from its mount near the door and checked the chamber, his movements jerky and nervous. Loaded. He moved to the window, careful to stay low, peering out at the scene unfolding before him. "There you are," he whispered, his voice laced with a mixture of triumph and anticipation. He had planned for more time, planned to release Max when Luna was closer, planned to trap her, planned to make her watch as he inflicted unspeakable pain on her puppies. But she'd come sooner than expected, driven by her desperate need, her maternal instinct overriding her caution, limping, yes, but not broken, wounded, but not defeated. And she was alone. He grinned, a chilling expression that twisted his features into a grotesque parody of a smile. His plans were coming together. Travis opened the door and stepped onto the porch, the wind slamming into him like a wall, tearing at his coat, stinging his face with ice and snow. But he didn't flinch, didn't waver. He raised the shotgun, his hand trembling slightly, and leveled it at her. "Don't move," he growled, as if expecting her to understand, as if believing that words held any power over a force as primal as maternal love. But Luna didn't stop. She took one more step, then another, her body tense, her ears pinned back, her tail low, her eyes focused like a soldier entering a war zone. Travis had no idea what he was up against. Here. Scene 15. Sacrifice and Salvation. Echoes of valor. Travis took aim, his finger tightening on the trigger, his eyes narrowed with a mixture of hatred and anticipation. He was so close to fulfilling his twisted desire for revenge, so close to silencing the dog that had haunted his dreams for years. But something moved behind the trees, a fleeting shadow, a momentary disruption in the swirling snow, a whisper of movement that caught his attention for just a fraction of a second. He blinked, his focus wavering, his grip loosening slightly on the shotgun. The camera flickered again on the monitor inside the cabin, a glitch in the signal, a momentary disruption in the feed. And for a split second, he saw it. A second figure appeared on the back path, a fleeting glimpse of a human form, obscured by the snow and the shadows. Not Luna. Someone else. He turned his head just slightly, his eyes darting towards the back of the cabin, his focus shifting for just a split second. And that's when Luna charged. Not at him, at Max. She lunged towards her pup, a blur of sable fur and unwavering determination, snapping the rope with one bite of her powerful jaws, her teeth tearing through the coarse fibers with ease. She shoved Max down with her paw, shielding him with her own body, protecting him from the danger that loomed above. The shot rang out, echoing through the forest, shattering the silence with a deafening blast. James, Donna, and Carter heard it, the sound jolting them to a halt, their bodies tensing, their senses on high alert. "That was close," Donna said, her voice grim, her eyes scanning the trees, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. "Move now." Back at the cabin, Travis lowered the gun, his face contorted with rage and frustration. He'd missed, barely, but he'd missed. The recoil made him stumble back against the porch post, his body shaking with fury. Luna was already turning, snarling, her eyes wild with fury, her teeth bared, her body a coiled spring ready to unleash its power. Max cowered beneath her, whimpering, his body trembling with fear, but safe, protected by his mother's unwavering love. Travis cursed, a string of vile words spewing from his mouth, his face contorted with rage. He ducked back inside, slamming the door shut, his mind racing, his plan unraveling. He scrambled to the back of the cabin, his movements frantic and desperate. He pulled open a trap door in the floor, revealing a crawl space lined with old survival gear and crates, a haven from the storm, a sanctuary from the danger. It was dark, tight, and claustrophobic, but familiar, a place where he could disappear, a place where he could hide. He moved like a rat in a tunnel, disappearing from view, vanishing into the darkness. Luna didn't pursue. She had a different priority now, a different instinct driving her. She nuzzled Max gently, licking his ears, whining low in her throat, reassuring him that he was safe, that he was loved. He responded by licking her chin, his small body trembling, his gratitude unspoken. It was the first moment of calm in days, a fleeting respite from the storm, but it wouldn't last. The wind roared louder, the snow thickened, the danger intensified. They were not safe yet. From the trees, James and the others finally emerged, their faces grim, their weapons drawn, their bodies tense. They saw her standing like a statue, her body wrapped around her son, blood seeping from her leg, a testament to her unwavering courage. James fell to his knees beside her, breathless, his voice choked with emotion. "We found you," he whispered, his hand reaching out to stroke her fur. Luna didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his presence. Her eyes were still fixed on the cabin, her senses on high alert, her body prepared for the next threat. The storm was in full roar now, hammering the trees, battering the cabin, turning the clearing into a swirling chaos of white. The fight was far from over.